Hi, it's Dr. Noseworthy again. Here we are for the fourth and final installment in the Unique Wellness Lifestyle series focusing on exercise. Today we're going to talk about fueling for success. Before we get into the details of that, we want to make sure that we do a review of our last session because that was a little bit complicated. I tried to give you some supporting materials, but let's talk about the Core 4 outline. We said that most of your workouts, if not all, need to have 4 core elements, and that is a very specific warm-up. We talked about stretching and warming up your tight parts and your gnarly bits. We also want to have a strength piece to make sure that we are, at the very least, maintaining muscle mass and in some cases developing more muscle mass. We also talked about metabolic conditioning and paying attention to different intensity levels, and then following that with cool down and mobility work to maintain your flexibility. And that's really what goes a long way in making sure that you can keep doing appropriate exercise for a very long time. Now today we're going to be talking about improving your metabolic tipping point as well as some specific pre and post workout fueling protocols, and then we're going to throw in a brain boosting protocol at the end. Now, today's session is relatively short. Hopefully by now you've got a fairly good grounding on what's going on with you metabolically. Hopefully by this point we've got some progress and we've made some forward movement in terms of recovery. So let's talk about changing and improving your metabolic tipping point. Remember, the tipping point is that point where if you work out right up to it, you get your best results. But if you go past it, you start getting not just diminishing returns, but you can actually perpetuate your problems. So higher intensity rules the day, but the problem is that higher intensity workouts of any kind and variety increases the production of free radicals and inflammation. And on top of that, most of the clients we work with are coming to us because they have compromised metabolic systems that themselves also increase inflammation, oxidative stress, and deplete the antioxidant capacity. And it's those two things, controlling inflammation and having good antioxidant capacity to quench your free radicals. It's those things that really define where your metabolic tipping point is. And so we have a little bit of a conundrum. We have a shaky foundation from which to exercise, and the way we want to exercise can actually perpetuate that if we're not respecting that metabolic tipping point. But one of the very simple strategies, in addition to the diet and the lifestyle changes and the general supplementation we've been using as we're working through the different phases and priorities of your protocol, is to increase the intake of nutritional compounds that we know from medical research have the greatest impact on controlling inflammation and controlling free radicals. And very quickly, those would be turmeric or curcumin, resveratrol, glutathione, and then the use of herbal adaptogens like you might find in a product called adaptocrine. Now, chances are you've used some or perhaps all of these at some point in your protocol. Remember, these videos are pre-recorded and they're applicable to everyone, so we need to talk about individual requirements and variations in our one-on-ones. We're just painting the big picture here. But we have several different kinds and sources of these different compounds, and I'll tell you when it comes to anti-inflammatory effects of things like turmeric and resveratrol, all of the medical research in the last several years has been pointing towards what are called liposomal forms, and these are powders that have been kind of dissolved in a lipophilic form. These are little tiny fat droplets that improve absorption and improve bioavailability. So you get more out of these liquid forms than you do out of just say a standard powdered form. So if you're currently using these, great. We can use those as a strategy not just to help control your metabolic issues, but also to promote changing your metabolic tipping point so you can engage in the kind of exercise that we're looking for. Now, if you're not using these currently, you may have used them in the past or you may haven't used them at all. If you want to add them into your protocol, talk to us. We want to be careful of overloading you and asking you to take too many things so that even a good protocol becomes hard to comply with. But if we feel like the next step has to be, let's get control of that metabolic tipping point so you can engage in exercise appropriately or recover from things that you're doing now better, then we may have to augment that. We may have to take more stuff for a short period of time. So again, in our one-on-one sessions, let's make sure we bring that item up and bring it up for discussion. Now, what about pre-workout fueling? Well, there's two different camps here. For many years, exercise advocates have said, well, especially if you want to burn body fat, that it's best to exercise on an empty stomach. And that's true because as soon as you take in nutrition, it tends to change the kind of fuel that you're burning, particularly if you're getting up and eating, say a whole bunch of carbohydrates. But if the key here is what's going on with your blood sugar. Some people get up in the morning and they can work out very well. I am one of those people. I can get up on an empty stomach and work out and perform very well. But we have friends and family and, of course, clients that can't, because they tend to have a low blood sugar scenario and they actually need some kind of a pre-workout meal or shake to allow them to work out at the level that's going to give them the benefit. And if they try to work out without some additional fuel, then they crash, they exceed their metabolic tipping point, and then we're on a downhill slide after that. So depending on what your blood sugar profile and pattern and what your tolerance is, you might be able to exercise on an empty stomach. But if not, a small pre-workout meal can really help. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Something just as small as 10 or 15 grams of protein plus 10 to 15 grams of some kind of a simple carbohydrate would do the trick. And you could easily accomplish that by using, say, the Clearvite protein powder with a few ounces of coconut milk, or maybe you use Clearvite with some water and you shake that up and drink it, and then maybe have half a banana. And ideally you would do that probably 30 minutes to 45 minutes before you work out. So really, depending on what your daily routine is, you might be able to sneak this in, you might not. But I want to make sure that you're aware that you have a couple of options, but it really has to be dictated predominantly by your blood sugar pattern and your tolerance. And you may not know that until you start working out, especially if you're working out first thing in the morning. You may not know until you actually try it to see what happens. But if you find that you're working out early on an empty stomach and you're crashing and you're not performing well, the very simple first fix we do is just put in a little bit of nutrition prior to that, and something liquid which absorbs quickly and doesn't tax your digestive system would be the best option for that. The other thing that's quite often important would be to support your electrolyte system. And your electrolytes basically are your minerals like sodium, potassium, chloride, that kind of stuff. And I personally use a product called Electro pH Complex. And this is especially important in high heat and humidity scenarios. So we're living in Florida, and I'll tell you, my absolute favorite time to work out is in the middle of the day in the middle of the summer. Now, that's probably because I grew up on the eastern coast of Canada, and the most common or the most frequent weather forecast was rain, drizzle, and fog. And so Florida for us was a wonderful place because of the consistent heat and the sunshine, which is not what we grew up with. But the problem with working out outdoors in high heat and humidity is that you sweat a lot, and as you're sweating, you lose a lot of electrolytes. Now, I don't need to use the Electro pH Complex when I'm working out in the fall and the wintertime. Even though it's still warm, it's not nearly as warm as the summertime, and so I don't sweat as much, I don't lose the electrolytes. So again, for you, depending on what your blood sugar and your adrenal status is, depending on the environment that you're working out in, using the Electro pH Complex, actually both before and after your workout, can really make a difference, not just in performance, but also in your recovery. Now, what about a post-workout fueling strategy? Well, the most important thing is as soon as you're done working out, particularly if you've done some high-intensity interval training or you've lifted some weights in a way that's going to tax your system, like that moderate intensity for moderately high reps. The most important thing for you is to replenish your glycogen stores. Glycogen basically is the storage form of glucose, or what's commonly called blood sugar. And glycogen is stored predominantly in your muscles and in your liver, but it's your glycogen stores that gives you fuel for the next day or the next several hours. And it also speeds and supports tissue repair. So it's really important to get some nutrition in. And there's been a tremendous amount of study in this, and there are some varying opinions on what the best post-workout refueling strategy is. But the bottom line is, if you're somewhere around the guidelines that I have on the screen here, you're going to recover better than if you didn't do this. So again, 20 to 30 grams of protein, 30 to 40 grams of carbs with little to no fat, simply because the fat's going to slow down absorption. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we take advantage of a 30-minute window after you finish exercise where nutrients will flood into the muscles and really have very little negative impact on things like blood sugar. So it's almost like when you're finished working out, your muscles become like a sponge, and whatever you offer it, it will take in readily within that 30-minute window without having some downsides. And this is where some people who normally might be carb sensitive can take advantage of this. And if you're only eating maybe 40, 50, 60, 70 grams of carbs per day, if you reserve 30 to 40 of those for your post-workout meal, and then whatever remainder of carbohydrates you're eating throughout the day you spread out, you're going to fuel your recovery. You're going to actually not only recover well, but be able to perform better the next time that you work out. Now, what's the best thing? Is it better for real food? Is it better for protein shakes? Well, I think the general rule is eat real food, if you can tolerate that. But I will tell you from my own personal experience, as well as that of many others, if I've had a hard workout, my stomach doesn't want to handle real food. So I'll come in from my garage gym and I'll go straight to the kitchen, and out comes the blender, and in goes the water or the coconut or almond milk, unsweetened of course, and the protein powders and the simple carbs. I like to use a lot of mixed berries. Sometimes I'll throw in half a banana, and all of these individual things are based on your tolerance. But that's a quick way for me to get the nutrition in without taxing a digestive system that tends to get shut down with more intense exercise. Now, there are people that have cast iron stomachs, and they can handle anything. They come in from a workout and they can sit down and have a full meal, and that's fantastic. I think if you can do real food, but follow the guidelines and try to get somewhere close to where these numbers are. Now, there's a range there. So depending if you're a little bit larger with more muscle mass, you want to be in the higher end of the range. If you're a little bit smaller and have less muscle mass, you might want to go on the lower end. But you can play with these numbers, and you can even play a little bit with the ratios. So for example, for high-level athletes and people who have been doing this for a long time and working out very hard, it's usually a 2-to-1 carb to protein ratio. And the other thing to think about here when we're looking at recovering from post-workout, especially if you're still in a scenario where you're dealing with inflammation you haven't quite controlled, or you want to just have this added measure, you can select from any one or several of these to help boost it. Now, again, depending on where you are in your program when you're listening or re-listening to this video, you may already have this stuff in your protocol, or you may want to put this in the back of your mind to say, okay, when I'm done my program and I'm starting to kick it up to another notch, I can go back and I have different strategies to make sure that I don't exceed that metabolic tipping point. So quite often, it's not just a matter of fueling from a food or say protein or carbohydrate standpoint. It's also about using turmeric or resveratrol or glutathione or these herbal adaptogens to help dampen the post-exercise inflammation and oxidative stress. So what about the brain boosting protocol? Well, there's several different ways to apply this. One, and the scenario that I'm giving you here is we're placing a very short protocol at the beginning of the day. And this is appropriate in two circumstances. One is if you are just trying to support brain function and blood flow to the brain. This is a great way and time to do it. But also this would be very appropriate if you have a cortisol issue like an adrenal dysfunction, specifically with low cortisol in the morning. And so what we would have someone do is we would have them, as soon as they wake up, apply 1 pump of a cream called Adrenostem. Now, the name implies that it stimulates the adrenal glands, which it actually doesn't do. What it does is it slows down the breakdown and the clearance of cortisol. So whatever amount of cortisol you have in the morning, it will last longer by using the Adrenostem cream. And again, this particular part of the protocol is really dependent on what your circadian rhythm is, and it's appropriate for people with low morning cortisol. We wouldn't take someone with normal or high morning cortisol and do this. So please, again, make sure that we're looking at your individual circumstance and don't take this as a one-size-fits-all approach. But if you do have that low morning cortisol, which we can certainly flag on a saliva test, but in the absence of a saliva test, if you're that kind of person who it takes forever to get out of bed and it takes forever to get your motor started, then using the Adrenostem first thing in the morning can help boost energy and boost your brain wakefulness and get that to happen faster. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll have people keep the Adrenostem product just right on their bedside table. So the moment they wake up, as soon as they turn off their alarm, they reach for the Adrenostem, they take a little pump, and they rub the cream on the inside of their elbow or maybe their hands and that kind of stuff, and just wait 5 minutes or so, and within 5 minutes they typically start waking up quite a bit faster. But here's where it gets really interesting, is that what we want is we want within 5 minutes of getting out of bed. It says waking, but you might wake and lay in bed for a few minutes. But within 5 minutes of getting out of bed, if you take 1 to 3 teaspoons of a product called Nitric Balance, Nitric Balance is formulated to support nitric oxide production, and this is where we get protection and activation of the brain and blood flow increase, right? Causes vasodilation and blood flow delivery. And so within 5 minutes, taking 1 to 3 teaspoons of Nitric Balance in anticipation of doing a very short, high-intensity interval training period. So we're talking about 3 to 5 minutes. And there's a window, there's a 20-minute interval from the moment you wake up to when you're going to get your best results from this particular approach. So within 5 minutes of getting out of bed, you take 1 to 3 teaspoons of Nitric Balance, and then within 20 minutes of getting out of bed, you do 3 to 5 minutes of some kind of high-intensity interval exercise. And it could be anything. We don't have to worry at this point about the core 4 model of those 4 different elements of warm up and strength piece and metabolic conditioning and then cool down. This could very simply be 3 to 5 minutes of jumping jacks, or 3 to 5 minutes of jump rope, or 3 to 5 minutes of some short, intense intervals on a treadmill or on a bike, or doing some burpees, anything at all. And the point here is to get the nutrients from the adrenostim, if appropriate, and the Nitric Balance into your system, so that when you trigger increased heart rate and blood flow, that's what activates the active ingredients in the Nitric Balance to help activate and protect your brain and help it to improve blood flow, right? So it's a really elegant but very simple way to get blood flowing, to protect your heart, to protect your brain. So let's go through it one more time. It's a morning brain boosting protocol. Step number 1, the use of adrenostim would be dependent on your cortisol levels in the morning. Do you have normal circadian rhythm, or are you that kind of person that has low cortisol and it takes forever to get out of bed and get moving? Well, if you are, as soon as you wake up, take that adrenostim off your bedside table and apply it and rub it into someplace on your body, like hands or inner arms and elbows, where the skin is relatively thin and it can absorb well. Within 5 minutes of doing that, get up and take 1 to 3 teaspoons of Nitric Balance. And within 20 minutes of getting out of bed, you spend 3 to 5 minutes doing some kind of activity to get your heart rate up. Now, it says high intensity. What does that mean for us? 70% of your theoretical maximum heart rate. And you should already be aware of that. But if you're not, 220 minus your age gives you your theoretical maximum heart rate, so 220 minus your age, and then take 70% of that number, and within that 3 to 5 minute period of time, you've got to get your heart rate up to that level. And again, it doesn't matter what the exercise is, it's all about using blood flow and using the nutrients in Nitric Balance particularly to boost brain function and to get the blood going and cause tissue perfusion. Now, as a general brain boosting protocol, you can use the Nitric Balance anytime you work out. And the benefit and the magic, so to speak, with this is because the nutrients in Nitric Balance increase blood flow. The more turbulent your blood flow is, and we've talked about this before when we talked about the intensity variable, we talked about endothelial nitric oxide synthase. Whether you have a hard time in the morning or not really doesn't matter. And maybe you just don't have the capacity to get up and work out first thing in the morning. Maybe you've got a bunch of young kids, and the moment your eyes are awake, you're in mommy or daddy mode. You know, I get it. There's life obstacles that get in the way sometimes. But if that's the case, then you'll want to use your Nitric Balance 5 to 10 minutes before any exercise protocol. Right? You want to get that stuff into your system so that you take advantage of the combination of the nutrients in Nitric Balance and their metabolic effect and the impact of increasing blood flow within the context of having that stuff in your system. So you can do the morning specific brain boosting protocol. Again, that's probably best done for someone who's got a poor circadian rhythm first thing in the morning, although anybody can do it. And in the absence of that, then just do a couple of teaspoons of Nitric Balance before any kind of exercise program. It doesn't matter which day or what time of day you do it. So here's the summary as we bring the exercise sessions down to a close. In part one, we defined fitness as increased capacity across broad time and modal domains. And basically what that means is that we want to be good at a whole bunch of different things rather than being a specialist. The ultra marathoner, the strongest man or woman in the world, they have to sacrifice other things to be so good at one. And we want to be moderately good at all things because it's that general physical preparedness that actually prepares you for the sport of life. We also define fitness in terms of functionality, meaning whatever you choose to do has to have high transferability or high carryover into things that you do on a day-to-day basis. We also talked about personalizing intensity, right? It's not about what your neighbor or your brother, sister, or cousin can do. It's what is intense for you as an individual person. So don't be afraid of that word, but make sure that you're following the guidelines of that minimal threshold of intensity that will allow you to trigger those biological responses that we talked about several times. So that's 70% of your theoretical maximum heart rate. We also talked about a functional hierarchy, like how do we decide which exercises to do or how to do them? Well, we have to base it on the relative value. So for example, compound movements, what are commonly called the big movements that use multiple joints and muscles at one time, have more value than isolation movements, which are typically one joint, one small muscle group. We also talked about how free weights tend to be more favorable and have a greater impact and carryover than, say, working in machines. We talked about stabilizing your own body and using balance and core systems and stability while you're doing your exercises. And then we went and we finished off session 2 by talking about different goals, whether it's toning or speed development or muscle building. And we said that there are certain set and repetition guidelines that you have to honor. The bottom line is most of us need to put on a few pounds. And to do that, we need to lift moderately heavy weights that will allow us to fatigue within 8 to 12 repetitions. That's kind of the magic muscle building zone, so to speak. Then we went on to the Core 4 outline, which we just covered in the last session. So very quickly, 4 elements in almost all of your workouts, which would be an appropriate warm-up, the strength piece, the metabolic conditioning piece, as well as appropriate cool down and mobility. And then finally today, we just talked about controlling and improving your metabolic tipping point, pre and post fueling strategies, as well as your brain boosting protocol. Well, I hope you've found value in this. And remember, there are a million different ways to work out. We're not trying to be your trainers, and we're not trying to give you very specific workout programs to follow. I'm trying to teach you ideas and concepts that you can construct your own. And if you want to get some specific things, there's a number of free resources just freely available on the internet. As I mentioned before, feel free to hire a trainer. But whatever you decide to do, we'd be happy to give you some input. We'd be happy to clarify any of these concepts and any of the ideas. What we want to do is be able to take this framework that we've discussed over the last 4 sessions and then help you apply it to yourself, right? That's really our job in the one-on-one sessions. So thanks for listening. This is the end of the exercise session, so we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.